when we started the business, we wanted to make sure that we delivered within 5 minutes. But the question becomes, does anyone actually need it delivered in 5 minutes? Or if it's delivered in 24 hours, is that more than enough time?
Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? You, your values, your life. Seriously, it is possible. I'm Tonya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, we're here to show you how.
Tonya Kubo here with operations expert extraordinaire, or at least my favorite operations expert, and everyday effectiveness CEO, Gwen Bortner. And today, Gwen, I have a tricky little topic to discuss with you. I want to talk about solving the right problems in the right order, because I feel like oftentimes what I hear, at least on the marketing front, right, is, what are we solving for? Are we solving for the right problem? Let's dig deeper and make sure that we're solving the right problem, because solving the wrong problem just takes you down a path that nobody wants to go on. And something that you have taught me is it's not just about solving the right problem, but it's also solving the problems in the correct order. So maybe just open us up by explaining why that's so important.
The biggest reason that the order that we solve the problems is important is because it helps, I'm going to say minimize. I'm not going to say eliminate, but it helps minimize rework. So that we aren't actually solving a thing, then coming over here and saying, oh, that fix over here wasn't really quite the fix that we needed. We needed to do something else. Whereas if we would have done this other thing first, we would have just done the one fix over here instead of fixing this other thing, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 times. And a great example that we see a lot in the entrepreneurial world is buying a piece of software and saying, right, the symptom is, something's not working, so I'm going to buy a new piece of software that's going to fix it. It's like, is that really the problem? And then, we work through things, we get down to some other cause, and it's like, oh no, this is the problem. It's like, oh yeah, now that software isn't the right software, and we're going to have to make another fix. And it doesn't happen a lot, but sometimes it's like, and we're going to go back to where we started. And so now all of the process of changing over to a new software and then changing back to the original, that's a lot of wasted time and effort and rework. And, I'm not saying this happens 85 or 90% of the time of this specific example, but it's not uncommon to see, oh, we made decisions and did things, and now we have to make new decisions and do some of the same things again. And so now we're duplicating time and effort, and, time, quite honestly, is our most precious resource.
Right. Well, and what that reminds me of, that's actually a really good example, because it reminds me of the recent rebrand that we worked on together. Right. So I feel the need to tell everybody about my very optimistic view here. Okay. I had an optimistic vision. We had a logo, we had colors, we had fonts, we had a whole brand thing, and it just wasn't quite right. So, the solution to it not being quite right is to hire a designer who specializes in taking a brand that you love that's not quite right and making it right. Except I don't even think it took a full session with her for you to recognize, Gwen, that it wasn't that the brand wasn't quite right. You didn't love it at all. And then we had to stop. And there was this part of me that was like, no, I have the wheels in motion. I've set my dates. I've set my timelines. I want to, let's keep going. And you had to go, whoa. If we keep going, we are going to end up with something we hate, where right now we just don't quite love it. So let's stop here. Let's figure out what it is that we'll love, and then let's pick the project back up. And it did take time, and it did, it pushed it, probably the timeline back maybe a month, But I think we would both agree that we land 2 months, fine, 2 months. My memory, it just things are so much beautifuler and easier when I think about them than they are in reality sometimes. But we landed in a better place, right? Because it wasn't just solving the right problem, right? Because we knew we had a brand problem, but having to solve it in the right order.
Yeah, because the thing, this really is a great example that we've been living with, right?
Right.
In a very real and active, sort
living
of way.
with it.
It is. I've gone through this process several times, and part of the reason, from my perspective, is one of the root cause issues has been not having someone owning all of the aspects of the brand marketing piece that really owned it in the same way I should own it. Like I was able to truly delegate it to you, and that you're making decisions very, very, very closely to the same way I would make decisions, because you've been with me long enough, you've taken long enough that you really understand my point of view, instead of it just being someone who said, well, this really is a good answer, this is a right answer, not saying it's a right answer for me. And so the root cause wasn't that I didn't hire good people, and that it wasn't any of those individual things. The root cause was not having this central hub that was paying attention to all of the pieces going on. And to me, that's why the difference is so important is if I would have just hired our brand extension person in the way that I have done in the past, we would have had the typical issue at some point to be like, yeah, I mean, it's fine. It doesn't make me really happy. I don't think it's quite right. And it doesn't necessarily resonate, doesn't necessarily say all the things that it's supposed to say. So it's not like that I've used bad people, but I've missed the root cause in this case. And the root cause being not having a true unified message view of the whole picture of what we're trying to do.
Okay. All right. So then that's a good example. Like what I'd like to do is, so I think that's a really good sort of marketing example. And I think marketing is an area where we oftentimes solve symptoms versus looking for a root cause. But I think one area which I bet touches the lives of every single person listening is cash flow issues. So with cash flow, am I the only person who sees this? Like, I feel like people oftentimes are just looking at the surface income and expenses. And oftentimes what drives a cash flow issue is something deeper. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
I love numbers and I love cash flow. And I agree with you. I do think it's something that affects businesses at some point in time, not always and not forever, but a lot of businesses have it. And we've talked about it before, in the podcast, because it is a bit ubiquitous within, the industry that we're having to deal with it at some point in time. And the common thought that I see is if we're having a problem with cash flow, we need to sell more, because we think of that cash flow is we need more money. And when I say need more money, the first place anybody's brain goes, including my own, is sell more, right? Create more income. We need more money, create more income. That's a very logical place to go. But that is potentially a symptom, not necessarily what's causing the cash flow problem. And so this is where going into looking at what is actually the root cause can make a huge difference, because sometimes selling more isn't actually going to be the problem. For example, this is an extreme example, but if it costs you $10 to, your widget that you're selling costs $10, but you're selling it for $9, selling 100 more is not going to help your cash flow
Right.
and not make it up in volume.
Okay, so that's an example of
you're going to lose $100.
right. So that's an example of it seems like a cash flow issue, but really it's a pricing issue in that case.
In this case, it's a pricing issue or a cost of production issue.
Okay, yeah,
right, because maybe you're able to change a production behavior or a supplier or something, some other element, and actually get it down to a cost where now selling 100 versus 1 actually is making you more money, right?
Okay.
So that's one example of the cash flow problem. But the other is sometimes your the term I like to use is leaking money. I like to think of it as a bucket, right? That there's money coming in at the top like water, and if your bucket is solid, then you're taking money out with very specific choices, right? So the money comes out here and it comes out here, but sometimes you've got some little holes in the bottom of your bucket, and pinholes are the worst because they don't seem like very much. They're little tiny holes, and it's just going drip, 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 drip. And it doesn't seem, it's like, well, that's not that big of a deal. It's just not that big of a deal. But the problem with pinholes is pinholes can become real holes, and real holes can become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so where are potentially the leaks in your overall business model, right? It could be leaks in effectiveness in people. It could be leaks in apps that you're paying for that you're no longer using. It could, there's all sorts of places that could be leaks. The other cash flow issue is what I call the Peter Paul issue, which is you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. And so it feels like we are supportive, but really we're paying for yesterday's product with today's money, and we don't actually have today's money to pay for today's product. And so we're always running, we're getting further and further and further behind over time, because we keep trying to sell more and more and more and more, hoping that will allow us to catch up. But we're always behind the 8 ball, and we're never actually catching up. So all of those are cash flow issues. They are very, very different cash flow issues. And pretty much for the most part, putting more money in doesn't solve any of them.
Right. Okay, so I think that's a really good illustration in terms of showcasing sort of the difference between having a symptom that you're solving and then actually like digging deeper into the root cause and solving that. Could you, and I'm going to put you on the spot here, but could you give us an example or maybe walk me through the process of how addressing a problem in the wrong order would impact a business?
Yeah. So let's say that where we think the issue is that we have hired the wrong people.
Okay.
I've
been there.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And so our cash flow issue is we think a people issue. That the people that we've hired are not the right people and they're not actually working effectively. Okay. And so we let those people go, and then we hire new people. And then we have the same problem again. And then we let those people go, and we hire new people, and we have the same problem again.
And at what point do I let the hiring manager go because I blame them for hiring the wrong people?
Well, and often that's us. So
yeah, I know.
Right. And so we think it's a people issue, and because they're not performing at the level that we expect them to perform. But in this case, where often it is it's a process issue, it's a communications issue. There's all sorts of other things that could be driving that particular cash flow issue, because it is still a cash flow issue. we're paying for 8 hours of work a day and we feel like we're only getting 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But it's not actually because of the people that we hired. It's because our systems aren't working in the way that we think they really should be.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, they have to hand it off and then it comes back, and then they hand it off and it comes back, and they hand it off. Every time that it's, being a handoff in this case,
Mm-hmm.
we're losing productivity, where maybe the right answer is, yeah, you actually only need this person half time and you need this person half time, but this person works half time in the morning and this person works half time in the afternoon. They don't both work full time all day, going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Okay. Not a perfect example, but that's a process issue, not a people issue. And if you got it fixed, you would have found that your first set of people were also the right people. But now we spend a lot of money in the onboarding, offboarding, hiring, unhiring, rehiring, piece, because it wasn't actually a people issue. It was a process issue.
Okay. So what can I do as a business owner? Like, are there questions that I could ask myself? Is there maybe, I don't know, a 5-point checklist I could go through that would help me to know whether I'm prioritizing my business problems effectively or accurately?
So this is going to sound like a really self-serving answer, but it's not. It's a real true thing. Is it's really hard to do this by yourself.
Okay.
Okay. Because we use the phrase around here a lot. You can't read the label inside the jar, and that's true. And so a lot of times you can't see that there would be a different way than going back and forth between these people. You can't even conceive of it. And so you're never going to find that problem. This is where having someone who comes in from an outside and says, so why does this get passed back and forth, at a time? Couldn't this person just spend the morning doing this and this person do the afternoon? And then by the end of the day, we would deliver this product, whatever it happens to be. When we started the business, we wanted to make sure that we delivered within 5 minutes. But the question becomes, does anyone actually need it delivered in 5 minutes? Or if it's delivered in 24 hours, is that more than enough time? Right? But the owner who really loved the fact that they were delivering in 5 minutes probably is never going to ask themselves that question. And they can't conceive of asking that question. But when someone on the outside says, so why is 5 minutes better than 24 hours? They often can't actually answer that.
Right.
Or they can, but when you say, but at this price, does that actually make sense? It's like, oh, well, maybe not. So then there becomes other questions. And so I don't feel like there's an absolute piece. I will say the best way to do it is to work with someone either outside the organization or brand new to the organization. Because new people, if they're really encouraged to ask the questions and say, so why do we go back and forth? You hire these new people that we're talking about, and they start asking the questions like, wouldn't it be easier if I worked on this for, a morning and then they worked on it for an afternoon, and the question comes up, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, yeah, maybe that actually is the right answer.
Right.
The outside perspective is so important. It doesn't have to come from, a paid consultant, but it does need to be someone who's not so ingrained. It also, if you've got a big enough organization, it can come from another department, right? Where they're not as familiar with the nuances and the details. But it's really, really hard because, we work together. I can't do it for my own business either, even though I do this as my profession.
Well, and I think, some things that I like, trying to think of how to put this. I do think if you're listening to this and you're going, okay, because part of it is you have to even know, like if I was to work on this with a peer, right? What questions should my peer ask me in order to help me come to the right conclusion? And so I think the first thing, what I'm hearing you say is, okay, so the first thing we have to do is we have to name the problem, and we have to get clear, and we have to get succinct about it. And then I think the second thing we would need to do then is we then need to detail the impact of the problem, right? So the problem is we keep hiring folks and nobody is working out. Okay, so what's the impact of that? Well, there's the training time. All this lost productivity and training time takes a boatload of time to, reevaluate the job description, blah, 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 blah. Okay, and then also they're not working out. What does that mean? What does that look like? What's the impact of them, like whatever they're doing that's not working out? And then from there, I think it's a matter of going, okay, and what drives that? Okay, is that necessary? Like, I think what the question that I don't think business owners ask themselves enough. We ask ourselves a lot of what questions, we ask ourselves a lot of why questions, but I don't know that we ever ask ourselves, but does it have to be that way?
We were just having a conversation as part of the small business book club about a beautiful constraint. And one of the pieces that came out of that is, instead of saying what's stopping us, is the phrase, we could if, or we can if, or a version of we can if. And so I really think the way you're talking about there is that same mindset shift of saying, okay, how, these people can be more effective if we can, if they can, if, and saying, well, they can if, we extend the delivery time. They can if, right? And I think that really is the place that you start looking for the root cause, because in the process of this can if, all of a sudden it's like, oh, by changing this element, whatever it is, often way down the line in this process, we say, oh, well, that changes all of these other things. And we can start in our mind saying, oh, well, we can look through that. That's worth a try. Let's do that. And then we can start seeing that change in evaluation of what's happening. Right.
Right.
And I do think your point is, you've got to have someone that's asking a question that you wouldn't typically ask. Right. And that you also need to be thinking about, not always about why it wouldn't work, but how it could work. Because that gets us into a more creative place. And I've talked about it often, that part of my success is I have seen so many things that work. I can come up with a list of alternatives really fast. That often the person I'm working with has never even seen or heard of. And so it just doesn't occur to them. But you could get there with this kind of can if process.
Yeah. Well, and I think also what you made me realize is sometimes we default to asking for perspective from people who do our exact same thing. And we're better off getting perspective from somebody who actually has no idea what we do, because then they won't carry the same default assumptions we carry.
Yeah, you and I have both seen that in our group quarterly program that we've had, where there have been folks that are in similar industries, and then there's folks that are don't know a thing about that industry. And often in the small group conversations, people come back and it's like, well, I didn't think I could be of any value, but they loved my question because they came at it from a complete novice perspective. They asked a question that no one in their industry would have ever asked.
All right. Yeah. No, that is something we do hear a lot. Okay. So what I would like for you to do, Gwen, now, because I feel like we've really covered this topic really well, and so I feel like this is a good place to end. But if somebody were to pick up just right now, what would be the 2 to 3 things that you think would be best for them to jot down to not forget?
So, thing number one is rarely the way the problem is presenting, the
Mm-hmm.
symptom, is rarely the actual cause. There's almost always something deeper. Sometimes it's in what I would call a direct line.
Mm-hmm.
That this thing, it's because of this. Oh, here's the root cause. It's fairly straightforward. But more often than not, because operations is such an integrated activity, the
Mm-hmm.
actual root cause is somewhere way off in what we would call another department or another,
Yeah.
source.
Mm-hmm.
So don't get too stuck on staying in, I'll call the vertical path
Right.
of the problem, right? So if you're seeing the symptom, realize so one is it's probably not the root cause. It can be, usually not.
Mm-hmm.
And look, the second thing would be, don't just look in that obvious line of process, but
Mm-hmm.
look outside and say, are there other places? And then the third thing I would say is try to get perspective from someone that you trust, but who isn't necessarily deeply embedded in your business. It can be a new employee, it can
Mm-hmm.
be an outside consultant, it can be a peer, from a networking group that has a different perspective. There's lots of places that you can get it, but be prepared to ask and answer hard questions, and be asking the positive. What if this wasn't true? What can we do if? What can we do if? Can we do if? I really think those are the three biggies.
Okay. Okay. Those sound great. Thank you for walking us through that. Now, what I would ask is anybody listening to the show, I would love for you to email me specifically, Tonya at everydayeffectiveness.com. That's Tonya at everydayeffectiveness.com. And I would love to know, who do you get this kind of perspective from? And if there's an example that you have from your own business where you discovered after the fact you were solving either the wrong problem entirely, or you were solving the right problem, but you were solving it in the wrong order, we'd love to hear those examples from you and use those maybe in a future show, or to even build out resources for future listeners. And thank you, Gwen. Thank you for being here. Thank you for walking us through this process. It was a little high level for me, but I feel like you helped me understand.
Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tonya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallyWant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting